OK, shall we move on to the other big story of the day? Members of the train drivers' union, ASLEF, are walking out again today as the long-running dispute over pay, jobs and working conditions continues.
Yeah, the strike's time to hit party conference in Manchester. Another strike has been planned for next Wednesday. That's when people are, of course, trying to get home from Manchester.
Now, earlier we spoke to the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, and he said the union should put the offer that's been made to their members before they walk out again.
At the moment, the strike that's taking place today, it's clearly a political strike, timed to coincide with the Conservative Party conference. You don't have to think very carefully to see that's the case. But look, there's a fair offer on the table. Train drivers get paid an average salary of £60,000 for a full-day, 35-hour week. The pay rise that's on the table that they won't put to their members would take that average salary to £65,000 a year. Now, look, I think most of your viewers will look at that and think that is actually quite fair and reasonable. It's effectively being funded from the taxpayer because the rail industry at the moment, post-COVID, is financially not sustainable. So we've got to deliver a fair and reasonable pay rise with essential reforms, and that's what's on the table, and that's what I hope ASLEF will put to their members, rather than carrying out what is effectively a political strike this week.
Well, joining us now from outside London Euston Station is the General Secretary of the ASLEF Union, Mick Whelan. A very good morning to you. Thanks for coming onto the programme. The Transport Secretary there said it's a fair and reasonable offer and you should put it to your members. What's your response?
Well, we're standing here, you'll see a cutout behind me of Where's Wally with Mark Harper's face on it. We haven't seen Mark Harper since January of last year, when he took over and he told me that the Rail Minister was going to facilitate talks. Before those talks took place, they put out an offer that we hadn't seen, that ripped up every term and condition that we had and was untenable. And then they begged us to come back to the table, and we set up a framework around that discussion about what we would do. And then they came back after we'd taken all our red lines out of discussion, tried to make it work, and that gave us an offer all our red lines in. They set this up to fail. And every time they say fair and reasonable, I see the words lies and deceit. Every time they say put it to your members, we've been dealing with these companies for 23 years. And our members' policy is we can only put out deals that we recommend, and they know that. And they've known that for 2.5 decades. The Minister knows that, the Department knows that, the Treasury knows that. And by the way, we do not work for the government. We work for all those railway companies that are making hundreds of millions of pounds and paying dividends to their shareholders. Yet train drivers are going half a decade without a pay rise.
So what is the big stumbling block here as far as you're concerned? Is it about pay and pay rises, or is it about those working conditions and the changes that they want to bring in?
Well, the first part is we're dealing with people only operating in bad faith. And the second thing is the changes aren't modernisation, they're Victorian terms and conditions. And if they truly want those terms and conditions, they're going to have to pay for them. Nobody's going to give up hundreds of millions of pounds of productivity for effectively a 20% pay cut. We haven't had a pay rise in 5 years. And there is no train driver in the country that would vote for it. Now, what they have voted for, because of the bad faith of the companies and the government, is serially 3 times 92 to 99% for action short of a strike and for strike action, because that's their voice saying they reject the deals that are out there.
I mean, the trouble is, Mick, our viewers and listeners heard what Mark Harper was saying earlier. They're hearing what you're saying now. And even if they actually think both of you are being fair and reasonable from your different positions, we're still getting nowhere. All this time later, there are still train strikes going on. You're still not getting what you want. The government clearly isn't getting what they want. How is it going to end, and when could it end?
Well, when we get some faith and honour in the process, that would assist it. At this moment in time, we have a government that is putting the railways into managed decline, closing ticket offices, ripping up investment, quite openly talking about truncating HS2, while cutting the tax duty on airlines, while investing in roads. This is a government that doesn't care about railways, and this is all part of them deterring people from travelling on the railways. And people think the last 2 fares rises have gone into the pockets of the workers on the railway. Well, they haven't, because we haven't had a pay rise for 5 years.
What difference would it make if Mark Harper sat down with you?
Well, he'd have to convince me first that he was going to be truthful and honest and not dissemble anymore. He'd have to convince us that he truly wanted this to work. And then, but there's some hope if we do see him that something will happen. Because at the end of the day, it's the dead hand of government that seems to be guiding these talks.
The bottom line with any negotiation is, of course, both sides need to give way. So, what would you give way on? Because it seems like you're determined to really stand
Well, nothing
your
at the
ground.
moment, because there's nothing for us to give way on. Well, let's put this in the context. I don't have a problem in Scotland. I don't have a problem in Wales. I don't have a problem in freight. I don't have a problem in open access. I don't have a problem in Merseyrail. I don't have a problem in Eurostar. I don't have a problem in the Elizabeth line. We've done 14 pay deals in the last 12 months. We have a Westminster-driven problem. That tells you the issue we've got.
And we were talking to the Transport Minister, about an hour ago, trying to get him to talk particularly about HS2 and whether that's ever going to happen. He said he didn't want to talk about railways today, he just wanted to talk about roads and about car drivers. How do you feel? I mean, is there an agenda going on here? Because we are all worried that if this goes on for very much longer, we're not going to have a railway system.
Well, I think we're always going to have a railway system, but the lies about levelling up at the Northern Powerhouse have come to fruition. Kemi Badenoch talking about people having to use their cars outside London is because they deregulated buses, took 100 million bus journeys out of the system. You can't use public transport where it doesn't exist. But we do know where you build it, they will come. And the success of the Elizabeth line, with it being oversubscribed by 140,000 people per day, using it more than we expected, and will pay for itself in less than half a decade, shows what can be done.
How concerned are you with the state of the railways in terms of the decline that we've seen post-COVID? We know fewer people are using the railways, and obviously that's being continued by the ongoing strike action. I mean, that's, inevitable, isn't it? But at what point do you think members of the public will turn around and say, well, we're never going to trust the railways again?
Well, the government's own figures for August show that we're 98% of pre-pandemic footfall Monday to Friday and 104% of footfall at weekends. So footfall's come back. Now, bearing in mind they haven't put the timetables back, as some of the companies only running 70% of the trains they used to run before, and many of them are running shorter trains. Actually, what's driving people off the railways is the government's lack of investment and continue increasing the fares. We've seen all across Europe companies reduce their fares to encourage people to use public transport. We've seen all across Europe people banning planes on short haul to encourage people to use trains and other methods of transport. And we've seen in China alone, they've built 25,000 miles of high-speed track, and we haven't built one.
What do you think of what's happening with HS2, or at least what's not happening with HS2?
Well, our view of HS2 in 2009, and bear in mind, is the government's managed it for the last 12 years, was they should have started on the south coast, started at the top end of Scotland and met in the middle. And then we would have had all these arguments about another train going to Birmingham. But also, one of the first things they did was take out the spur from HS2 into HS1. The whole principle of HS2 was to get on in Manchester or Leeds or somewhere and get off in Frankfurt or Amsterdam or in Paris. Nobody wants to get off in Old Oak. And how much is it going to cost to build the infrastructure to get people from Old Oak back into London? Right? The whole purpose of it finishing Euston was to get people to go down the Euston Road to get into HS1. But if we don't build it, we know that Euston itself will be closing during the peaks, according to the government's own study that's in the Independent today, because they won't be able to deal with the passenger numbers they have. We have a growing population. We need more capacity, not less. If we actually do want to deliver any of Kyoto, Paris or the 1%, we need HS2 in full to free up the capacity on the west coast, the east coast for freight alone. Never mind what it will do for regional railways and interurban railways across the country.
Yeah, well, look, that's a very fair point. A final point before we let you go, because obviously that drill's getting in the way a little bit. Mark Harper said, you're striking as people are trying to get to Manchester and you're striking as people are trying to get home from Manchester. He says this is nothing more than political.
Well, it's not political, it's industrial. Mr. Harper and his cronies for the last 16 months have been accusing us of attacking all sorts of events on strike days, which we haven't done. Because we haven't seen Mr. Harper, we decided to make a point today. Where's Wally? Where's Mark? Come and see us. We are striking today to get the attention of the Tory party and the government to resolve this dispute.
Mick Whelan, really good to talk to you. Appreciate it. Thanks for battling against that road drill there. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you. Yeah.